The first warning wasn't a scream or an alarm, it was the eerie silence of a man who should have been alive. On Rikers Island, silence never meant peace. It meant something had already gone wrong. The discovery came during a routine morning check. A 24-year-old pretrial detainee slumped on his bunk, motionless, days before his first court hearing. The officer who found him looked startled, then strangely calm, as if he'd seen this before. Because he had. Everyone here had. If stories like this fascinate you, hit subscribe, because this one only gets darker. For years, detainees awaiting trial had whispered the same phrase through the vents, through the chow lines, through the walls themselves: Rikers is where time stops, and people disappear. They weren't talking about escapes. They were talking about the bodies. Legally innocent people, men and women who hadn't yet faced a judge, kept dying behind these walls. Some were found curled on floors, cold to the touch. Others collapsed in overcrowded intake pens where officers were too overwhelmed to notice until it was too late. A few never made it past their first week. The system always produced a reason. Medical complications. Pre-existing conditions. Found unresponsive. But inside the dorms, detainees used different words: neglect, blind spots, delays, lies. It didn't take long for the pattern to become impossible to ignore. Units were so understaffed that officers sometimes covered 3 floors at once. Emergency buttons didn't work. Cameras glitched for hours. A detainee in crisis might scream for help until his voice broke before anyone came, if anyone came at all. The morning the young man was found, rumors spread faster than the investigators arriving at the gate. People said he'd filed a sick call request 2 days earlier. Others swore he'd told an officer he felt like he was dying. One detainee said he heard banging on the wall half the night. But every story ended the same way: no one checked on him. No one came. No one noticed. By afternoon, the official narrative had already formed: a tragic incident, nothing more. Paperwork circulated through the facility like a script everyone was expected to follow. Officers signed forms confirming they'd made their rounds on time. Supervisors countersigned without looking up. And the detainee's body was rolled out quietly, as if the less said, the faster it would disappear. What made this death different wasn't the tragedy, it was what happened next. A junior officer, barely 6 months on the job, hesitated when asked to initial the logbook. His face went pale. His hand shook. He knew the rounds hadn't been done when they claimed. He knew the cameras on that tier had been down. He knew this wasn't an accident, it was the result of a system collapsing under its own weight. And he also knew that if he spoke up, the fallout wouldn't stop at him. He took a breath, pen hovering over the paper. Then someone stepped into the room, closed the door behind him, and said quietly, "Think carefully. Once you write something different, you can't take it back." The officer didn't sign the logbook. Not at first. He stared at the blank space as if it were a trap sitting wide open. In Rikers, truth wasn't just dangerous, it was career suicide. And everyone in that room knew exactly what was at stake. Word of the death spread through the jail like a cold draft, slipping under doors, circling through the tiers. Detainees traded theories with low, tense voices. Some blamed medical neglect. Others blamed the guards. But the most unsettling whispers carried a simpler message: he asked for help. They ignored him. Inside the staff corridors, a different conversation was unfolding, one built on fear and survival. Supervisors warned their teams to tighten up their statements, a phrase everyone understood. It meant make the story clean, make the timeline match, make the paperwork airtight. Not accurate, airtight. The officer who'd hesitated felt the pressure sharpen. His colleagues pulled him aside, one by one. "We all miss rounds sometimes. Don't blow this up. You're new. Don't make enemies. Be smart, nobody wins if this goes upstairs." But there were things he couldn't unsee. He remembered the broken tier camera covered with a plastic bag. The emergency light that flickered for weeks without repair. the medical forms that sat on a desk so long the ink yellowed at the edges. Everything in the building seemed designed to hide failure rather than prevent it. Meanwhile, detainees on the unit began connecting dots of their own. A man awaiting a court date for a low-level charge said he hadn't been to medical in 3 days despite chest pains. Another said his bunkmate tried to harm himself and didn't get seen for hours. Intake was backed up so badly that some people slept on floors, heads against their bags, waiting for officers who never showed. These weren't incidents, they were symptoms. Behind closed doors, jail leadership scrambled to control the narrative. They issued a memo calling the death an unfortunate anomaly. They emphasized the detainees' complex medical history, despite having no records to prove it. And they quietly told officers to stop documenting staffing shortages in daily reports. The officer at the center of it all felt the walls closing in. Every shift became heavier. Every glance felt like a warning. Every radio call felt staged. He wasn't built for this, the denial, the excuses, the pressure to pretend nothing was falling apart. Then came the moment that changed everything. A detainee from the deceased man's unit slipped him a folded piece of paper through the gap in the food slot. No threats. No demands. Just a statement written in shaky handwriting. He begged for medical. We all heard him. They'll say they didn't. Attached to the note was something the officer didn't expect, a second piece of paper, torn from a commissary bag. On it was a crude sketch of the tier layout, with an X marking the cell. Under the X, 2 words, check cameras. He froze. The cameras on that tier were supposed to be fully operational. That's what the official memo said. But he knew the truth. If that camera recorded anything at all, the entire story would unravel. The officer waited until the unit quieted, until even the most restless detainees settled into the night hum of Rikers, the metallic groans, the distant shouts, the constant churn of a place that never really sleeps. That's when he made his move. He walked toward the security office with a calm he didn't feel, his badge tapping gently against his vest. Inside, a single monitor cast a pale glow across the room. Every tier camera was supposed to be listed there, rotating in slow, predictable cycles. He hesitated before pulling up the footage for the deceased detainee's cell. The memo said the camera had been working. The logbook said checks were done. The officers said nothing unusual happened. But the moment the screen flickered to life, the lie collapsed. The feed wasn't down. It had never been down. The footage showed the cell clearly, the detainee pacing, holding his side, knocking on the door at 2:41 a.m. His movements were unsteady. He kept pressing the call button, waiting, listening, pressing again. Minutes stretched. Then an hour. Then 2. No officer appeared. Around dawn, he lay down on the bunk. Not to sleep, to give up. The officer watching the footage felt something knot in his chest. This wasn't a tragic anomaly. It was recorded neglect. Visible neglect. The kind that couldn't be rewritten or cleaned up with creative paperwork. He printed a copy of the footage and tucked it into a plain envelope. No return label. No name. Just evidence. By morning, the jail was buzzing again. Rumors spread that the deceased detainee's family had hired an attorney. Advocacy groups were asking questions. The media had caught wind of another death on Rikers. And behind the scenes, leadership scrambled to get ahead of a story they didn't yet understand was already slipping out of their control. When the officer arrived for his shift, a supervisor called him into an office. The door closed behind him with a heavy click. "We need everyone on the same page," the supervisor said. "The camera on that tier malfunctioned. Understood?" The officer kept his voice steady. Understood. But in his pocket, the envelope was already gone, dropped into a mailbox on his way to work. A week later, everything detonated at once. The footage surfaced in a journalist's report, showing the detainee's final hours in devastating, undeniable detail. Advocacy groups demanded federal intervention. Politicians who once avoided the topic called for investigations. Families of other deceased detainees stepped forward, their stories echoing the same failures: missed checks, ignored calls for help, falsified logs. Rikers Island tried to deny it, then tried to rationalize it, then finally admitted that critical procedures were not followed. But the truth was simpler: the system had been broken long before that man died. The footage merely exposed what everyone inside already knew, that people were entering the jail legally innocent and leaving in body bags. The officer who leaked the footage never came forward. He didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. And as public pressure mounted, the question shifted from "how did this happen?" to "how many more have we never seen?" In the end, the tragedy became a harsh, undeniable reminder: justice delayed isn't just justice denied. On Rikers Island, it can be a death sentence. If you think this story was intense, the next one will leave you speechless. Subscribe for more true crime stories that'll keep you on the edge of your seat.